Learning doesn't stop. You haven't lost a magic window of time to learn. Our
Yeah.
conventional paper and pencil methods of
Yeah.
sitting in a desk and learning don't reveal or surface the.
So Jonathan, thank you again for meeting with me. I just love our conversations. I think that our missions are very aligned and we're really trying to do the same thing for people. So
Yeah, I
I
agree.
just appreciate when we get time to sit down and talk. So
Well,
thank you for taking
thanks
the
for
time.
having me on.
So I know that you've worked with thousands of families with children that do have an autism diagnosis. What patterns do you just see parents struggling with the most out of all of those families that you helped serve? If you could just name off a couple of things that you see as a professional parents struggling with.
Kimberly, great question. And I will say that having worked with so many children, by the way, in different countries all around the world, different languages, I've worked with interpreters, all sorts of things. And I say that because I look for patterns. It's really important to get a lot of
Mhm.
data, right? And look for the patterns. As much as we say, this saying, you've met one child with autism, you met one child with autism. So
Mhm.
it may be odd to say, well, what are the patterns? But your question is a good one, which is, well, what are the patterns that you see, especially in terms of parents' journey and parents' experience and what they're going through with the system, right? Maybe not so many patterns in the children themselves, but the family experience. And in fact, the number one pattern that I have seen over all of these years with thousands of children is what made me go into the line of work that I'm in today, which is a multidisciplinary approach. So take you back about 20 years as working in a center in Massachusetts. It was a play-based center. That's kind of where I started. I really was drawn to not so much, I'm going to say, the ABA approach. At the time, ABA didn't have a play-based model, didn't exist. Applied behavior analysis was very much discrete trial training, sitting at a desk, drills. And I didn't feel comfortable with that for all of the kids. It worked very well for some, but not all. But play based, really, you can have any child and play with some Legos and color and they're going to laugh, right? So I went that way. However, as I met with and spoke with and trained, I also worked with the children directly for many years. I was starting to coach parents. And the number one thing that they would say is, Jonathan, we like your play based stuff. We see what you're doing, but we're also doing physiotherapy. We have music therapy. We're also going to soccer practice. We're also have them in a social group. And the
Mhm.
question was always, how do these things connect? How do we coordinate them? And over the years, Kimberly, I would hear, I'm sure you've been in this as a mom 100 times or 1,000 times, is the soccer coach doesn't know what the speech therapist is doing. And the speech therapist has this great technique. And during their speech therapy sessions, they can have my child point to the animal picture, say a word, but then in soccer, he's silent. And I wish they
Mhm.
could talk and all of this. And so the number one thing that I saw over and over, Kimberly, is the number of choices that parents have to make of all of the different things from cod liver oil to swimming with dolphins to hyperbaric oxygen chambers to different medication, on and on, all of those choices, and then which one fits my unique child, and then what should I start with? I mean, we have limited resources, limited money, limited time, limited energy. Do I start with this? Do I start with this? This parent told me this is the best, but we're already enrolled here. So that, what I now call treatment mapping or therapy planning, creating a map, right? As you would know as a nurse, you triage and you have to sort of say, okay, we're going to do this first. We're going to hydrate the person first. Then we're going to do this. Then we're going to take care of the wound. Then we got to stop the bleeding. Whatever you have, I know that you have a whole triage hierarchy.
Mhm.
But we don't have that in autism treatment and therapy. We don't. It's a wild west. You could start anywhere and do
Mhm.
anything. And there's no professionals that I know about there that are saying, hey, you know what? I would love for your child to come to my play therapy program, but it's not the right time or it's not in the right order. Call me in 6 months after you've done this learning readiness program. We don't do that. In a hospital, they'll say, no, we don't put the cast on before we've done the surgery. It doesn't make any
Yeah.
sense. If there's an order, go to this department, then come back. autism therapy, nobody says don't come here and then come back. That's the number one issue. That's what I've been working with for 20 years with parents, is helping them figure out what's going to work for your child, but in what order and what timing to save you a ton of time in your child. Really important learning time.
I mean, that just helps with time at home because I know me and I just met with this this brand new music group called Hey Strawberry Road. They're like trying to make like inclusive music for
I
children.
love
It's
that
a
name.
great little company that they're putting together. And I just met with her, and one of the moms on there is the mother of a parent with autism. We had discussed, I had just gotten back actually before I sat down with that interview with editing my book with somebody that was just very heavy on my mind before I went into that podcast. And so when she was telling her story, our stories just aligned so well with the same, that isolation that you feel, that overwhelm. They hand you all these resources and are like, okay, go figure it out. And you enroll them in everything because you think that that's the most appropriate thing. And so if there was almost a triaging system or something in place, even right after your diagnosis, where you could get that done, that makes a huge difference for the child, obviously most important, but then also just the family dynamic because it's exhausting.
100%.
We When I sat down to write the our story part, I just reflected and I'm like, oh my gosh, like we used to do like 50 plus hours of therapy a week. My kids were like working more than a full-time job at 2 and 3 years old. That's just, that should not be happening. And so if we had something like that in place, that you educate the parents and then also like, hey, let's start here. And once we get this done, then we can move on to the next thing. I think that's
It's
how you see so
interesting.
much change.
Kimberly, there may be a parent listening right now. I'm sure there is. And they just heard what you said. My child is doing 50 hours and they're thinking, that's what we're doing. And there may be a parent listening saying, but I am seeing results. And
Right.
that may be true. And what
Mhm.
I would want to underline is, as many parents are seeing results, there's a lot of parents who aren't. And that's really the issue, is there may be a moment in a child's development where it's appropriate for the child to have what we would call, that we would know as intensive or maximum hours of training, because it matches their learning need, their learning ability, their capability. Maybe their body has become more healthy if they weren't that healthy. Maybe they were a picky eater. Now they're having more protein. Now they have energy to show up, to have that intensity, and it makes sense. But for a lot of kids, it doesn't make sense. So the problem is when a policy comes out or a theme goes through, the pediatricians and the psychiatrists and psychologists and all of the therapists who say, oh, you've got to maximize 40 hours a week. And that becomes this blanket statement for every child. I think that's problematic. And so
Yep.
again, and I don't know what the answer is for everybody, but I would just say the parents that I get to work with and have the honor to work with, we slow it down for a moment. And again, as a nurse, you would know this, is the time that you use for diagnosis, really properly doing evaluations, doing your blood work, and seeing what do we need to do. That informs the rest of the path. And it's okay to take that time. And you said when you get the diagnosis, instead of taking that time and figuring out that treatment plan, we run into it. We say, okay, I've got to sign my child up for this and this and this and this and this and this. And of course, that creates overwhelm. You know that every single medication and treatment have indications and contraindications put out by the
Mhm.
FDA. You can read it. It says, if you're drinking a martini, don't also have this. As they say, indications, this is what it's for, and contraindications. Don't use it if. I have been thinking for years, wouldn't it be amazing if our autism field agreed as a field that we would label our things, whether it's floor time, RDI, speech therapy, whatever it is, special diets, and say, here's what it works for. Do this if this symptom, this a situation. If you have $100,000 to spend, if you have, like, whatever
Right.
those indications are, And by the way, don't do this if you're also doing equestrian therapy and swimming or whatever it is. But wouldn't that be amazing for
Yeah.
parents? And if there's some universal system that we all agreed, we would have to be willing to say, my therapy works for a lot of kids, but it doesn't work for kids over 12 years old, let's just say. That would be so helpful for parents.
Same in my situation because I really try to speak to families that have more than one children. Maybe they have neurotypical, neurodiverse. Because my whole pain point that I had in my personal family was
Yeah.
we were doing all of these things and we were losing all this family time, and I didn't have the connection with my children that I
Yes.
thankfully have now. And I just always go back to that moment that we decided, hey, we need to advocate for our children. We need to not only advocate for them but for ourselves. This is too much. And I really tried to empower myself and pour as much knowledge as I could into myself through good therapists and podcasts and books and all of the things. And so now, since I've learned that, I'm trying to share it with other families.
Share it with others.
But again, not not going to work for every family. Sometimes that's why they need to go to 40, 50, whatever intensive hours of therapy they need, is because that just doesn't work in their home. Homeschooling is a crazy thing. I can't believe I'm doing it. And that's absolutely not the right path for everyone, but that's what works for us. And so I think that it is very important to come up with something like that where I need you to understand your family and your family dynamics, but hey, let's do this triage. Let's figure out what's the most important for you and your family. And then, hey, if you're already doing this, maybe we don't need to do this right now. And
Right?
that would be a game changer for families. I think that the biggest overwhelm, there's a lot of things that cause overwhelm, but one of the biggest things sometimes is just the amount of choices that are out there. And you want
Yep.
to do all the things because the magic pill or whatever we're looking for in the beginning. I don't know, but you want to try all the things so you can give your child, and it all comes from a place of love and a place from wanting to do the best for your
Yes, of
child.
course it
But
does. Yes.
sometimes it's just there's not enough roadmap to get us where we need to go.
Kimberly, you just mentioned as a parent, get a diagnosis, your child gets a diagnosis, or you already know, you
Right.
usually know before
Mhm.
the diagnosis happens. But one of the myths that I talk about in my book, just to challenge the myths of autism, that's I called it that. One of the myths is the myth of the 5 year window.
That's my favorite chapter in the book. That's what I was going to ask you about next. So I love that.
Okay, okay, go ahead. Yeah, it's a squeeze on parents.
Yeah,
Why
absolutely.
did you
That's
like that chapter, by the way? Why is it one of your faves?
one, I think just from personal experience. So I have a 7-year-old who's obviously over the age of 5, and he absolutely still breaks milestones and beats the norm every single day with something. And I
Hmm.
think that, and again, I think even that myth like came from a place of evidence-based research and love. Like, yes, the brain, I mean, it is like hyper developing in those early years, which I believe is where all of that came from. But that
Hmm.
doesn't mean that Maxwell can't learn new things. It doesn't
And
mean
that's the point. And in the chapter, just so for people who haven't read it, it's exactly what Kimberly just said, which is in the chapter, I say, here's what's fact, which is it's absolutely true that a child's brain is so ripe with an abundance of neural connections available for learning between 0 right up to 5. 0 to 3 really is the most. That's totally true in fact. So early learning is important. Get in there early. Here's what's fiction is that somehow that stops at some really critical moment called 5 years old, which happens to be the age when you start school. That's where that number came from. And I talk about that in the book. And it really is absolutely fiction. And I explain how it happens. I explain the USD policy, the IDEA policy that drives this early intervention. Again, early intervention, super important. But if your child is 5, guys, if you're listening to this, if your child is 7, like Kimberly's son, learning doesn't stop. You haven't lost a magic window of time to learn. And I share in the chapter a whole number of stories, not to raise false hope, but just as evidence to say this child started talking at 9. And it's not all about language, right? But this child is doing this at 13, and this child started to have friends at 17 for the first time in his life. I mean, there's still a lot of hope for learning and possibility, both biologically, right, cognitively, after 5 years old. And if we could take that sort of pressure squeeze off of parents, I know there's not a parent in the world that's going to stop trying at
Right.
1 and 2 and 3 and 4. So I don't think we have to worry about putting pressure on
Hmm.
parents. They're going to
Yeah.
try their best. But wouldn't it be nice to not have parents feel depressed and sad and anxious at 5 years old when they think they've, lost the chance for their kid, right?
Am just started this coaching program. I do sleep coaching now, and I was meeting with a client, and she said we were talking about, her daughter's sleep habits, and she said, "Yeah, I just went and had some blood work done, and they ran my cortisol level." And I'm like, "How did that go?" And she said, "Well, when they checked my level, they sat down with me, and she just said, 'Are you okay? How are you feeling?'" And because I mean, there's lots of studies that show that the cortisol level in parents of special needs children are equivalent to combat soldiers. I think that
Stress, like
stress level.
PTSD,
Yes, yes. And
right?
that's something that I don't think gets talked about enough. And I think a lot of that stems from, oh, this is an emergency. I have to fix it right now. I have to do
Yeah,
everything I possibly can. And, running on no sleep and make sure that the routine gets all the things get done. And I think that what I have found in my personal experience is yes, I absolutely believe in early intervention and the importance of that. But I think that one of the reasons that we try to stress that so much is because it's so much easier for my 18-month-old, my 3-year old. If I set up a new routine and a new system today, then they're golden. Then we are just going to be able to flow right through that. If I try to set up a new routine and a new system for my 7 and 9-year old, it's going to take some more time. It's
yeah,
not going to just change tomorrow or this week.
yeah,
Like I feel like it does in our our younger kids. And for children that do rely so heavily on all of these systems and all these
yeah,
routines, I
yeah.
think that for me, that's been the biggest game changer is just finding that evidence-based practice and setting up the right systems in my home. And
Talking about as your children get a bit older, if you're introducing a new routine, it's harder than when they were 2 or 3. I was asked to work with a 32-year-old autistic adult who still lives at home with his parents. His parents asked me, and he also wanted me to help them a bit. So I went to their home and I looked at their routines, and they had a couple of issues they wanted help with specifically. And when I laid out the approach that I was recommending, what was the number one challenge? Kimberly, it wasn't the 32-year-old autistic man. It wasn't
mhm,
him. It was the mom and dad.
yep.
And I say this with a laugh because they were the ones that called me. They wanted the support. They weren't
Mhm,
resistant to that. But when we talked about changing routines, right?
mhm,
He was 32. If I remember correctly, they were in their mid to, let's say, late 50s, somewhere between
mhm.
55 and 60. And they had their routines.
Yep.
The father went bowling on Wednesday night. The mother did her thing, and they
Mhm,
loved and were so committed to their son. But when I said, "Hey, I'm going to suggest you serve some different meals," they kind of went, "We're in our mid 50s. We're not changing dinner."
yep. Mhm,
So part of it is helping the autistic individual to adapt to new routines, but also when and you have a number of people in your family, right? 4 kids and
yep.
husbands, so you got to get all those other people.
Mhm,
Hey, y'all want to change,
yep.
so that we could help this one. So change is a thing, right? Change is a thing.
Yep. I think one of the things that I really, when I created this, it's called the Rest Reset program. And I really tried to use a lot of evidence-based research to create this like sleep support program. And the most important thing I think, because from my own evidence-based research as a mom that I've seen this in practice is something I call the support cycle. And it's just that it's like, I know that I need to have X, Y, and Z done throughout the day, but I also have to go to work. This kid has to go to this practice. I have 3 other kids. And so being able to talk with someone to like walk through, okay, I need to fit all of these things throughout my day, but how do I wove that into, everyday living? Because life doesn't stop when you get a diagnosis. If anything, it just accelerates a little bit. So I think that one of the best things that we can do is, put on the brakes and okay, let's figure out how we can do this and fit everything in where it needs to go and still be able to live life because your child's only going to be 3 or 5 or 7 one time. You're only going to be 30, however old you are, you're only going to be that age one time too. And so let's try to, enjoy every moment, even while we're trying to meet these milestones and get where we're going.
Right. Live while you're racing. Kimberly, you offer this training to parents for sleep. You've done, your own kind of mom research, as you say, the doctor mom research,
Hmm.
and you're a nurse and you know about it. I've read a number of books on sleep and the importance to our hormones,
Hmm.
therefore our moods, our exercise, our like that sleep cycle and how it affects everything. It's such a good example, Kimberly, of what we were talking about earlier of the order and timing. Going back to the first thing we were talking about, you get a diagnosis for your child and you think, okay, I've got to do social groups and I've got to do early intervention, I've got to do ABA, but some play therapy and changes that. When I first sit down with a family, I almost always, unless there's a critical behavior like self-injurious behavior or eloping at a high level or something, almost always start with basic health. And what I mean is sleep,
Hmm.
exercise. Is your kid, has a digital addiction? Is watching too much TV? Just some real, is he drinking enough water, hydration? Because as a medical professional, it's probably why you're focused on sleep as well, is you could spend $50,000 on ABA. And if your
Hmm.
child isn't getting good sleep and isn't eating nutritious meals and isn't having enough exercise and all of the other things, then they're showing up for that expensive but yet really important therapy and not able to fully maximize their benefit from it.
Right.
Would you go to a movie? Maybe you have a feature length movie, pay 25 bucks, buy another 15 bucks worth of popcorn and drinks and sleep through it. I mean,
Right.
a lot of us do because we're overtired.
Yes.
But the
We
point is,
do.
that doesn't make sense. It's better to go and do that and splurge and enjoy that and get the benefit from it when I'm able to stay awake and sort of benefit from it. So this idea of helping children show up to benefit from things, and sleep has to be like one of the most fundamental places to start when we talk about, well, what should I do first, Jonathan? One of the things is, well, your child might be PTSD stressed like this, may not be sleeping, isn't eating that well. I'm definitely not going to recommend he shows up for 40 hours of learning a week.
Right. My whole journey, when I think back, is so when I first talk about my chapter, Advocacy as a Muscle, in my book, when I first talk about that, my first journey in advocating for my child happened when we were doing 40 plus hours of therapy a week. They were in early education, they had all this other therapy, and they weren't sleeping through the night. And we were getting, me and my husband were maybe getting 2 and 3 hours of not even consistent sleep. Like I'd sleep a half hour here, he'd sleep an hour here,
Wow.
and then the kids were trying to go function and work
Yeah.
this full-time like job. We were working full-time jobs, which I don't know how safe that is thinking about it because we're both in the medical field, but
Yeah. Yeah.
on this little to no sleep. And so that was the first time I said, you know what, my kid can't go to therapy today. He slept maybe 2 hours last night. He has to go home and he has to rest.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then I got pushback. So that's how the advocating started because I was like, well, we're gonna go fix this. And I think it all goes back to that Maslow's, hierarchy of needs. If our basic needs aren't met, and that and for our sensory kiddos, I mean, that includes that regulation, I feel like in there too, to get them out of, that fight or flight state. But once that's met, then we can go on to, helping with getting our ADLs met and safety and security and all this other things. And I think that you're absolutely right. We try to add in all these extra things and all these expensive, lavish therapies, but we need to start with the basics and make
Totally,
it
totally
simplify
agree.
it way down for people. I absolutely.
Totally agree. I hope a lot of people listen to you and what you're saying. One little example of that is if your child is in, whether it's a school, I mentioned ABA, not to harp on that, but as a sort of a fairly more regimented
Right.
approach, right, than let's say a play-based, but it could be any kind of therapy. And if you're a parent listening to this and your child has a behavior pattern of trying to escape, right, like is pushing away, or the therapists have to hold him in or lock the door, or he's up running around like this, it may be an indication that their adrenals are going and going and going. And what we would do, when I say we, what in my multi-approach program, what we would do there, Kimberly, is we would say, okay, there's an order and a timing here. Your child's physiology and their receptivity or their lack of being receptive is signaling to us that they need to bring some, whether it's sleep, whether it's some switching from adrenals, right, sympathetic, parasympathetic, to get into a state of more alert but relaxed receptivity, right? You know
Mhm.
all about this. And so then a child could be invited to sit, whether it's in a beanbag or on the carpet or in a chair. And it still may be challenging to learn. We might have to do a lot of repetitions, but they're more receptive and they're not spending all their energy on escape and avoidance, but they're there. So if you're listening to as a parent, you say, well, so what should I do? Have a conversation, a real heart to heart, probably like Kimberly did when she called up the therapy that day and said, hey, you know what? My kid needs to sleep today, not have therapy.
Mhm.
Like that's an informed but a power move from a parent, meaning as you said, Kimberly, you got some pushback on that. Hey, you know what? Your child needs consistency. He should show up. But you advocated for him and said, nope, my kid needs some sleep. Right. And I would argue that most parents don't have that, I'm going to say, strength yet to be able to talk back to a therapist,
Mhm.
or at least advocate in that way. So I'm just saying, if your child has that pattern of these indications of high adrenaline escape, all these kinds of things, have a chat with your therapist and say, hey, you know what? Could we switch into a mode or a phase for a week or two of just maybe some rapport building, maybe some fun making, maybe some calming, maybe some sensory regulation stuff, so that your workroom, your therapy room, your space becomes associated with a bit more of a calmness and regulated child so they can benefit from all the great stuff that you have to give our child.
And then what can I do at home so they're regulated before they even get there? So we do all this play base playing and this rapport building so that they feel safe when they're there. But hey, what else can I do at home so that they're regulated and ready to be here when they get here?
Kimberly, that's what Thrive Guide is. I'm sorry, I'm going to sound like I'm selling something, but and the online, but
Mhm.
Thrive Guide, that's what that is. It's an early learning primer of things parents can do at home to get your child. We call it priming, to get them ready to be able to show up at all of the amazing therapies and education programs and great professionals that are there to help. But how do you have your child show up to benefit from it? And so Thrive Guide is sort of customized and personalizes this goal, this goal, this goal, this goal for your specific child. It's not another autism program. It's not saying this is going to cover reading, writing, spelling. But if you do these things, your child would be ready to learn better.
So, Jonathan, I do have your book, Challenging the Myths of Autism, here. What do you think is still maybe one of the biggest myths that parents are still hearing today that we can kind of debunk here or just give them some safety and security just, in this little moment that they're that we have their back.
Kimberly, and thanks for mentioning my book. And I hope everyone knows already, but you're coming out with a book as well. You
I
have come,
am.
it's just come out, right? In the book, there's 7 myths. You and I talked about the myth of the 5 year window. Another myth that I think is so prevalent. And by the way, I wrote this book over 10 years ago in the hope that the book and sort of my speaking engagements and other people would get on board and the myths would change, that we would change our thinking and what we tell parents. Sadly, here we are now, and there's most of those myths are still in existence. So one of them that you would know about is what I call the myth of rituals. Um, the myth of stereotypes or of repetitious and ritualized behavior. And there's a lot of myths around that, but the number one myth that I talk about that I still hear is this idea that ritualized repetitive behavior, like hand flapping, rocking back and forth, humming, that it's not good, not appropriate, needs to be stopped, and is in the way of learning. And I would say largely that would be the applied behavior analysis kind of
Mhm.
ethos is, hands down, quiet hands, no rocking, sit up straight. And what we've learned by having so many autistic voices now, autistic individuals who tell us their story of being a child, who tell us their story now, who are able to communicate in whatever way they do, say, hey, I needed to do that for self-regulation, or I
Mhm.
needed to do that to address a hypersensitivity I had. I covered my ears because of the sound. That's obvious. So in the chapter, I talk about some real examples that might not be as obvious as covering ears, of behaviors that an autistic individuals will do that are not only useful, but in some cases, sort of balancing, if you will, regulating, and so on and so forth. And I give lots of examples. I think the field is changing. I do. I think that there's more, obviously, acceptance around behaviors, and allowing a child to be in a movie theater or museum and flap their hands. There's less embarrassment. I think there's more acceptance, which is great. The step I would like to see us take, Kimberly, next as a field, as a community, is to have even more. So acceptance is good, but more understanding, and I mean clinically, physiologically, cognitively understanding of why those behaviors happen. They're not, in most cases, they're not random. In most cases, they're not bad, trying to act out and be disruptive behavior. And the more that we understand, I tell a couple of stories, Kimberly, of some, in some cases, biological underpinnings that are driving some of those repetitive behaviors. Fascinating. Like it's to me one of my favorite chapters just because it's so darn interesting.
And I do think that it's getting better. I We just took our kids to the
Yeah.
St. Louis Aquarium last week, and Max was having a hard time while we were in there. And several of the employees, we actually bought a membership. I was so impressed when I left because several of the employees came up to us and said, "Hey, could he use some headphones? He looks like he might
Oh,
need some
cool.
headphones." And Max won't put the headphones on because that would be too easy. But I liked the offer, and then they told us
Yeah.
about it. Their sensory room, so they were able to not only accepting, recognize what was happening and then what tools they could provide.
Have some action steps for it.
Yes. And so I was
Yeah.
very impressed with that. Something that I actually talk about in one of the stories I tell in that book is that I had a therapist come to the home who was still in the training phase. And so she was recording all of her sessions and then she'd send them to a provider. And the provider, one of the things that she said back, we did our first session in the therapy room. We are in our sensory room. We also did it at like 5:30, 6 o'clock in the evening when we're like tapped out for the night. I don't really know
Right.
what we were thinking. I think we were just thinking about the schedule, but and we did it in the sensory room, and the response back to the student from the therapist was, but did you see that big swing hanging? Like, think about a neurotypical child. That would even be distracting for them. And I just kind of chuckled when she said that, and we tried in a different location because I was trying to let her learn all the things and learn what she wanted to learn and find her place as a therapist. And I chuckle about that now because we do, we homeschool and we do school at home. And I didn't have the swing at one point, and I would just have Max sit at the desk. We'd have a to-do list. He'd start like rocking back and forth and like tapping his desk. And well, we got to get through the to-do list. So we'd just keep going. And then we'd end up on a full-on meltdown. We'd be on the ground and we'd be done with school for the day. And
Yep.
now I know that that swing is there because that's one of the inputs that Max needs. And so if
Yeah.
he starts just barely tapping on the desk, then I'm like, okay, let's finish our task that we're doing, and then we're gonna take a 5-minute break on the swing.
You got it.
And
Yep.
that
Yep.
actually like allows us, even that little break allows us so much more, not only good productive time, but even a longer period of time when you put it all together of
100%.
schooling. And I think that that's still something that we're getting closer and we're making lots of strides, but still something that we do need to build upon. So I think that a lot of the myths are, some of them are debunked and a lot of them are getting closer. So it'll just take time. We got it. It's okay.
We got it. We got it.
Last question that I just want to ask you, Jonathan, is so from a parent's perspective, what is one of the best mindset shifts you think that they could have to just help to change their trajectory at home, the trajectory of their child's life, and then their life as well as they walk this journey with them?
I mean, it's so individual, I think. It's hard to sort of universally say if all parents shifted this, because there's going to be a parent out there saying, "Oh, I've already done that," or "I've thought this." I think, in coaching parents and watching what they go through, in my approach, I break it almost into two kind of big categories. And one is something that you're an expert on, I know, because you talk about supports and organizing and files, and so really having your life ready, so as organized as you can. And I think about the sort of the practical side. How do I get more sleep? How do I take care of myself? How do I run my finance? All the practical side of stuff. What therapy am I going to do? How do I get there on time? All that stuff. So there's stuff going there. But the other side is what I call your mental health or attitude, right? And the feeling, the emotions, the feeling journey that I go through, the peaks and the valleys. And you'll know as well as any mom, Kimberly, that that can grind you and wear you down. And when you're not in the headspace that you can be, it impacts all of your parenting. If you're feeling impatient just with your life, with finances, impatient, you're going to sound impatient to your child, even though you don't mean to, et cetera, et cetera. So quite a bit of the mind shift you said, Jonathan, what's kind of like a mind shift we could do? Quite a bit of the work that I do with parents to help them is to have what I call attitude fitness. It's kind of like mental health fitness. We go to the gym to work out a bit or we do whatever to stay fit. But what about attitudinal fitness and kind of what does that look like? So I'll just give you two practical, just real quick. One would be we do try and shift to an attitude of gratitude. And I know that sounds like a fridge magnet and it's out there, but I
Love
mean in
it.
a real practical. It is so easy for all of our lives, but it's so easy to see what you don't have. Your kid can't go to birthday parties. Your kid, hasn't been able to go to a movie theater because they're not friendly about it, or like whatever it is, but the cup half empty. And it's
Mhm.
so easy and it's right to look at that. Like, I mean, I get it. But when you can say, here's what I'm grateful for today, or here's what did happen today, the little wins, the little successes, including things that you as a parent achieved. I didn't get half of my list done, but I got half of my list done. you know? So that is kind of, I think, a mental health survival technique. The second
Absolutely.
one on that attitude side. So one is attitude of gratitude, and the other one is being really gracious and gentle and forgiving and loving to yourself. Number of parents I've worked with who are beating themselves up. They're, I mean, I would even say, Kimberly, when you were staying up till 2 in the morning in some way is kind of self-abusive. You did it for all of the right reasons because you are so committed to your family and your kids. I'm not judging you for that. But you know that that wasn't the best thing for you to survive. And then ultimately it knocks on. But if I could have shown up during that time and held you by the hands for a moment as a professional, as a friend supporting and saying, hey, you're doing the best you can.
Mhm.
Because you're always trying to do more in race,
Mhm.
believing that there's more to do, and maybe there is, but to be able to be kind to yourself, to be gentle with yourself. It's not your fault, and you're doing the best you can. And it's so important. Kimberly, I've had conversations with many, many parents who, of course, spend years looking back, laying awake at night, 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, and they're going back and saying, was it that glass of wine I had at that party just before I got pregnant? Was it that argument I had with my husband at 6 months? Was it when he was 1 year old and he slept? They're trying to figure out what happened. What did I do? And they're awake and they're not sleeping and they're tormented by it. And again, we get it, but it's so important that you really take care of yourself. And so if there's a mind shift that you could do as a parent, one of them is see the cup half full that you can every day. And the other is try and be a best friend to yourself. Try and be kind to yourself. Try and be even loving. Extend forgiveness to yourself if you need to.
Absolutely. I think that that's something, the small changes we can make throughout the day make the biggest difference, at least in our home. I focus so much on making sure my children are regulated that really until the last month, that's something that we struggled with in our home. we have like time during the day where they can kind of do whatever they want in the home. We've done, our school for the day and our therapy goals for the day, and we've finished all that. And so they have their me time. So I'm like trying to get all the chores and stuff done during that time. And so something that, because I don't mind to do chores, I don't mind to do housework. I'm kind of a weirdo like that. But something that I started to do was just put in a podcast, a self-help podcast or a business podcast or whatever I want to listen to at the time. And I can still hear my children if I need to, but it's like a little me time. And now it's just like known at 7 o'clock. I'm like, okay, I'm putting on my show for me. If you need me, you need to come tap me so that you can get my attention. Because that's something very small that I have found that helps to regulate me so I can pour into that cup so that I can pour into those
I
kiddos.
love that. And Kimberly, I love that you're able to identify the thing that works for you. For you, it's, as you're saying, a podcast, let's say, of one of the things. For someone else, it might be a cup of mint tea. Someone
Right.
else, it's exercise. I
Mhm.
love that you're doing that. If you're not, by the way, listening yet, on Mondays, I put out, it's just 10 minutes. It's a little audio cast, and we call it the AIM, Attitude, Intention, Motivation. And it's a little boost with a couple little stories around autism, but that is giving hope and motivation. And that kind of might be something you want to listen to
Yeah,
too.
I
It's
love that.
totally free. You can sign up for it. But taking care of yourself, I love that you're doing that, Kimberly. It's so good.
Jonathan, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
I would just say get a copy of Kimberly's new book because she's telling you her journey and all of her insights and everything she's learned. And if you're interested, absolutely, you can get a copy of Challenging the Myths of Autism. And also, as I just mentioned, it's a 10-minute audio cast on, you can sign up for that at thriveguide.co. But Kimberly, what I wanted to say last is thank you for inviting me here. I love my
Absolutely.
conversations with you. And I want to just recognize and acknowledge as a professional in the field, as a mom, the stuff that you are doing to support other parents, right? You don't need to have more work on your plate. You got four kids and a full-time medical career, but you're here doing a podcast, you're helping other moms, you just wrote a book to help other people, you do sleep training with parents, you're doing so much. So I guess, thank you for all the stuff that you're doing too to help parents and support other people.
You. And thank you as well. Put a copy or a link to your book down in the show notes, and then I'll also put a link to What I've Learned in the Trenches, my book that will be out next week in the show notes too, so everyone can
Sure.
get their hand on those. So thank you so much, Jonathan. I always enjoy
Thanks,
the
Kimberly.
talks.